Holding the polished brass key firmly in my trembling hand, a profound sense of quiet victory washed over my tired soul as I stood in the sunlit entryway. At 34 years old, as a senior remote architect, this moment marked the sacred culmination of 6 long years spent working grueling late-night shifts, forfeiting every single vacation, and meticulously saving every hard-earned penny. Standing on the warm hardwood floor, I took a deep breath of the fresh paint, knowing every square foot represented my unwavering discipline and resilience. To an outsider, a 4-bedroom house for a single woman might have seemed excessive, but every single room possessed a vital, functional purpose for my remote career and personal sanctuary. The spacious master bedroom served as my peaceful haven, while the second bedroom was transformed into a state-of-the-art home office, equipped with drafting monitors for architectural projects. The third bedroom housed my creative design studio, a dedicated space filled with fabric swatches, physical models, and rendering stations, where my professional ideas came to life. The fourth bedroom was my long-awaited reading room, a quiet retreat lined with bookshelves, soft lighting, and thriving green plants, where my mind could finally rest and heal. This house was not an extravagant display of wealth, but a thoughtfully crafted ecosystem built to foster my independence, professional growth, and emotional well-being. Feeling the cool brass key pressed tightly against my palm, I smiled peacefully, knowing that after years of relentless sacrifice, I had finally created a sanctuary to call my own. The architectural beauty of this space was a physical testament to my endurance, proving that no amount of silent struggle goes unrewarded in the end. With my heart fluttering with childlike anticipation, I eagerly invited my parents, Arthur and Eleanor, over for dinner under the pretense of a casual weekend get-together. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing a home-cooked meal, envisioning a heartwarming surprise where my mother would tear up with genuine pride and my father would embrace me tightly. I longed for them to celebrate my independence and praise the immense dedication it took to purchase my very first house entirely on my own. However, the second my parents crossed the threshold, the warm, joyful ambiance evaporated into an uncomfortable, icy stillness that chilled me to the bone. My mother's sharp eyes darted immediately across the spacious foyer, her face instantly darkening with a bitter, unreadable scowl, rather than lighting up with excitement. My father stood beside her with his arms crossed tightly against his chest, staring up at the high ceilings with a severe, accusatory glare, as if he had walked into a crime scene. Instead of admiring the elegant architecture or congratulating me on this monumental milestone, they radiated a heavy, suffocating aura of deep resentment and hostility. I stood frozen near the kitchen counter, my hands trembling slightly as the golden vision of familial warmth shattered against the cold reality of their harsh, judgment-filled silence. My mother turned to me, her voice cold enough to freeze the room, and snapped, demanding whose house this was, utterly refusing to acknowledge my radiant achievement on this day. I stood completely paralyzed by their unexpected coldness, feeling the joyous warmth of my accomplishment wither under the heavy weight of their immediate hostility. Swallowing the sudden lump in my throat, I held up my shining brass keyring with a proud, hopeful smile, desperately clinging to my joy. "It's mine, Mom," I replied softly, my voice filled with emotion. "I bought it. Every single one of the 4 bedrooms belongs to me." Instead of the warm cheer I had naively expected, my father's face turned a violent, humiliated shade of crimson, his jaw clenching so tight that a hiss escaped through his teeth. Before I could even process his sudden rage, my mother erupted into a sharp, hysterical shriek that echoed harshly off the empty living room walls. "How could you buy a 4-bedroom house without telling us?" she screamed, looking at me with pure, unfiltered fury. "Do you have any idea what you've just ruined?" I stood rooted to the spot, the heavy key feeling icily cold against my skin as tears of utter bewilderment stung the corners of my eyes. "Ruined? Mom, I bought a home after saving honorably for 6 years. Why on earth are you screaming at me as if I committed a terrible crime?" My father took an aggressive step forward, pointing a heavy finger directly at my chest, his voice booming with toxic authority over my personal accomplishment. "Because you are supposed to consult us first before making such a massive purchase," he roared, demanding control over my hard-earned life as if I were still a helpless child. Their complete lack of parental pride cut deeper than any physical knife, stripping away the fragile hope I had harbored about gaining their heartfelt approval. "I don't need your permission to spend my own hard-earned money," I shouted back, my voice cracking under the overwhelming weight of their irrational anger and disrespect. My mother let out a bitter, sarcastic laugh, throwing her hands into the air as if my independence were a personal insult to the family. "Your sister Maya and Greg are being evicted next month because they have nowhere to go," my father snapped, revealing the horrifying truth behind their rage. My older sister Maya and her husband Greg had been struggling financially for years, primarily because Greg refused to hold down a steady job for more than 3 months. My parents admitted they had spent the last month orchestrating an insidious plan. They intended to manipulate me into acting as a co-signer or joint owner on a property. Their goal was to force me into financing a massive house where Maya, Greg, and their 3 children could live rent-free under my roof permanently. By working quietly with the bank to secure a single title mortgage exclusively in my own name, I had unwittingly shattered their secret entitlement trap before it began. I stared at them in utter disbelief, a cold, sharp anger replacing my grief, as I realized they viewed my life savings merely as a shared family bank account. They had planned to trade away my future and peace of mind without my knowledge, prioritizing my sister's freeloading lifestyle over my right to autonomy. The toxic entitlement in their eyes was terrifying, confirming that they viewed my hard work not as a personal triumph, but as a resource to exploit. "Greg hasn't held a steady job in 3 years, I said firmly, my voice dead serious as I looked my parents straight in the eye. "I am not turning my dream home into a rent-free shelter for a grown man who refuses to work. while Maya enables his laziness. My father's face darkened into a dangerous glare as he stepped closer, accusing me of being cold-hearted, selfish, and arrogant for letting my nieces suffer. I am 34 years old, I replied calmly, walking over to the front door and pulling it wide open to the cool night air. I earned every single brick of this house with my own sweat, late hours, and sacrifice. I will not be guilt-tripped in my own living room. My mother hissed venomously as she walked past me into the dark, her eyes blazing with unbridled fury and deep-seated resentment. "You are turning your back on your own blood, Diana," she spat coldly. "Mark my words, this family will never, ever forgive you for this crime." I locked the heavy door behind them, my hands shaking uncontrollably against the cool wood, as tears finally spilled down my cheeks in the quiet hallway. Though my heart ached from their devastating betrayal, a quiet strength settled deep within my spirit, signaling the start of my journey toward true freedom. Standing alone in the serene silence of my new home, I took a deep breath, determined to protect my boundaries regardless of their threats. Over the next 48 hours, my smartphone transformed into a relentless, buzzing war zone that threatened to overwhelm my fragile peace of mind. It began with a vicious barrage of text messages from my sister Maya, each notification pinging with an increasingly hostile and emotionally manipulative tone. "How could you possibly do this to my innocent children?" one message read, her words dripping with theatrical outrage and bitter accusation. "You have 4 empty bedrooms sitting completely vacant while my young kids are about to be thrown onto the street. You are an absolute monster, Diana." Shortly after, her husband Greg left a passive-aggressive voicemail, his smooth, practiced voice claiming he was deeply disappointed that my massive ego was coming between blood relatives. Despite the immense pressure, I maintained a strict, unyielding silence, deliberately choosing not to reply to a single text or return a single call. My years of personal growth had taught me that engaging with toxic family members only fuels their hysterical drama and provides them with emotional leverage to manipulate you further. I placed my phone on silent mode, facing the screen down on my desk, refusing to let their calculated outrage penetrate the serene sanctuary I had worked so hard to build. I knew that my silence was my greatest shield, a firm boundary that prevented their emotional vortex from dragging me back into their familiar cycle of guilt and submission. Every unanswered chime was a small victory, reinforcing my commitment to protect my autonomy regardless of their aggressive attempts to shame me into total compliance. Before long, the harassment escalated as my parents activated their network of extended relatives, summoning a wave of self-righteous flying monkeys to fight their battle. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins whom I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly felt compelled to reach out and offer their unsolicited, highly judgmental opinions. The most egregious intrusion occurred when my Aunt Linda called my direct office line at work, completely breaching professional boundaries to lecture me about family sanctity. Her voice condescended over the speaker, asking with fake concern if I could truly sleep comfortably in a spacious 4-bedroom house while my sister struggled. I sat at my desk, listening to her preach about blood obligation, feeling a wave of intense disgust at the transparent hypocrisy radiating through the receiver. Aunt Linda had never offered a single dollar of her own money to support Maya's family, yet she felt perfectly entitled to demand that I sacrifice my hard-earned home. It became painfully clear that these well-meaning relatives loved preaching moral superiority as long as the financial burden fell entirely on someone else's shoulders. I calmly informed my aunt that my personal housing decisions were not up for family debate, before politely ending the call and blocking her number permanently. The experience exposed the ugly reality of family dynamics, where performative empathy is weaponized to force compliant members into enabling chronic irresponsibility without question today. I recognized that standing firm against emotional manipulation was the only way to preserve my self-respect and protect the sacred peace I had cultivated. Late that evening, a quiet call came through from my younger cousin Sarah, her voice hesitant and filled with genuine, heartfelt sympathy as I answered. Sarah explained that she couldn't stay silent any longer and felt obligated to reveal the disturbing truth behind my mother's sudden, explosive outrage. She confessed that during a family Sunday dinner held the previous month, my mother had proudly announced to the entire extended family that I was buying a house. Aunt Eleanor told everyone at the table that you were acquiring a massive 4-bedroom property specifically to house Maya's family, Sarah revealed softly. My mother had confidently assured everyone that because I was single, I had no legitimate need for such space, declaring it my duty to support my sister. Hearing those words sent an icy chill straight through my veins, making my breath hitch as the full scope of their deception crystallized before me. My parents hadn't just hoped Maya would move in. They had actively promised my future home to her without ever bothering to consult me first. They had treated my 6 years of grueling late-night shifts, extreme frugal living, and personal sacrifice as a shared family bank account ready for redistribution. They had systematically traded away my independence and peace of mind behind my back, casually selling my future to cover for my sister's lifelong financial failures today. Their shameless entitlement exposed the toxic foundation of our family dynamic, proving that my personal boundaries were an essential defense against their greed. Sitting in the dim light of my living room after Sarah hung up, the crushing weight of profound emotional betrayal settled heavily on my chest. The realization that my own parents viewed my existence not as an independent daughter to be cherished, but as a financial utility, cut deeper than any knife. I had spent my entire adult life hoping that if I worked hard enough and achieved undeniable success, I would finally earn their unconditional love and pride. Instead, I was forced to confront the painful truth that I was merely viewed as a safety net, an asset to be harvested whenever my sister needed rescuing. Their love was entirely conditional, reserved exclusively for the child who conformed to their expectations or required constant parental intervention to survive her own mistakes. Yet, amid the sharp ache of heartbreak, a powerful inner awakening began to bloom within the quiet depths of my wounded spirit. I realized that I no longer needed their validation to prove my worth, nor did I need their permission to live a life built on my own terms. The illusion of family harmony was shattered. But in its place emerged an unshakable clarity regarding my own value and rights as an autonomous adult woman. I wiped away my final tears of self-pity, making a solemn vow never again to allow my parents or sister to manipulate my sacrifice for their convenience. Today, I stood on the solid foundation of my own achievements, ready to reclaim my narrative and embrace the freedom that comes with true self-determination. 3 days later arrived Grandma Evelyn's 85th birthday celebration, a formal dinner hosted in a private dining room at an upscale downtown restaurant. Part of me desperately wanted to stay home to avoid the inevitable ambush, but I loved my grandmother deeply and refused to let their toxicity ruin her day. I spent the afternoon carefully organizing a crisp manila envelope, packing it with incontrovertible documentation before slipping it securely into my leather handbag. Dressing in an elegant, tailored navy blazer, I mentally fortified my boundaries, stepping into the restaurant with a calm, composed, and unshakable demeanor. As expected, the atmosphere in the private room was thick with unspoken tension. My parents completely ignored my presence, while Maya glared bitterly from afar. I bypassed their hostile glares smoothly, walking straight to Grandma Evelyn's side to kiss her cheek, hand her a thoughtful gift, and shower her with genuine warmth. I focused entirely on making my grandmother feel celebrated, listening intently to her stories about her garden while sipping sparkling water with perfect grace. Underneath my serene exterior, I remained fully vigilant, knowing that my family's desperate entitlement would inevitably push them to orchestrate a public confrontation tonight. I was no longer the frightened, compliant daughter they could corner and shame. I was a prepared woman ready to stand my ground and reveal the truth today. The impending storm did not intimidate me, for I possessed the quiet strength and undeniable facts needed to dismantle their false narrative once and for all. The ambient lighting inside the private dining room cast a soft glow over the mahogany tables, yet the atmosphere remained thick with an unsettling, suffocating tension. My parents sat across the room, deliberately ignoring my presence, while my sister Maya shot bitter, venomous glares at me over the rim of her water glass. Every subtle gesture from my immediate family was calculated to make me feel like an unwelcome intruder, casting a dark shadow over what should have been a festive milestone. However, I refused to let their weaponized hostility break my inner peace or ruin my 85-year-old grandmother's special evening. I maintained a calm, genuine smile on my face, deliberately taking my seat directly beside Grandma Evelyn to anchor myself in her gentle, unwavering affection. We spent the first hour chatting happily about her prized rose garden, reminiscing about childhood summers, and sharing quiet laughs that shielded me from the cold stares of my relatives. My grandmother's soft hand rested warmly on mine, offering a silent sanctuary of love amid the surrounding storm of silent resentment and judgment. I focused every ounce of my energy on honoring her incredible legacy, allowing her warmth to soothe the lingering ache in my heart from my parents' painful betrayal. I knew that my calm composure was a powerful shield, proving to everyone present that my self-worth was no longer tied to my family's approval. As waitstaff cleared the dinner plates, I took a slow, grounding breath, remaining mentally prepared for the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead today. The long journey toward healing began with establishing unbreakable personal boundaries against emotional manipulation. Just as the waiters finished serving dessert, my father stood up abruptly, tapping his crystal water glass with a silver fork to command total silence across the room. The sharp, metallic clinking echoed off the wood-paneled walls, cutting off happy conversations and drawing the curious gaze of all 20 extended family members toward him. My father cleared his throat theatrically, putting on a masterful performance of a heartbroken, overburdened patriarch crushed under the heavy weight of familial tragedy. "Before we conclude this wonderful evening for Mom," my dad announced, his voice trembling with manufactured grief, "we must address a painful situation that is tearing our family apart." He wrapped a comforting arm around Maya, who immediately began sobbing quietly into a linen napkin, playing her assigned role of the helpless victim to perfection. My mother stepped forward, her face contorted into a mask of tragic sorrow as she gestured dramatically toward me with a trembling hand. "We begged Diana to open her heart and her empty bedrooms to her own flesh and blood," my mother declared softly, ensuring her voice carried across the silent room. Yet she refused, choosing to hoard 4 massive rooms while leaving her innocent young nieces and nephews to face the cold cruelty of the streets. They laid out their carefully crafted ambush before the entire family, weaponizing public shame in a desperate attempt to force me into total submission today. They relied on collective pressure to crush my spirit, entirely unaware that I possessed the truth needed to dismantle their lies. A wave of shocked gasps and indignant murmurs instantly rippled across the long banquet table as relatives exchanged scandalized glances and shook their heads in utter disbelief. Maya's theatrical sobs grew louder, while her husband Greg let out a heavy, disappointed sigh, crossing his arms with an air of bitter moral superiority. They had deliberately backed me into a public corner before 20 family members, fully expecting me to crumble under the unbearable weight of collective social condemnation. The room felt suffocatingly small, filled with heavy judgment and whispered accusations that branded me as an unfeeling, selfish monster who had abandoned her own bloodline. For a brief second, the old, familiar instinct to shrink back, apologize, and keep the peace threatened to resurface within my chest. Yet, as I felt the cool, solid weight of the manila envelope inside my handbag, a surge of quiet, unshakable courage replaced my fleeting fear. I slowly stood up from my chair, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my head held high as I met the harsh, judgmental eyes of my relatives one by one. The room fell into an expectant, heavy hush as everyone waited for my tearful surrender or panicked defense before the family tribunal. Instead of breaking down, I radiated an aura of dead calm, ready to strip away their hypocritical lies and expose the undeniable truth to everyone sitting around the table today. My quiet confidence unsettled them, signaling that the compliant victim they expected to humiliate had transformed into a self-assured woman. "Since you have chosen to make my private finances public entertainment," I said, my voice steady, clear, and commanding enough to echo across the silent restaurant, "let us talk about the actual, unvarnished truth of this situation." I unzipped my bag, pulled out a thick stack of printed bank statements and Venmo transaction records, and laid them flat onto the polished table. Turning directly toward Maya and Greg, I looked them straight in the eye, as Greg's face instantly flushed a guilty, bright shade of crimson. "Over the last 4 years, I have transferred over $12,000 directly to you two, under the guise of helping with rent, utilities, and groceries for the kids." I held up the printed text messages, reading Greg's desperate pleas for emergency cash, alongside receipts showing the money was immediately spent on brand new PS5 consoles and luxury takeout. "Where did that money actually go, Greg? Did it go toward finding a stable job, or did it finance your daily video games and lazy lifestyle while I worked late-night shifts?" A stunned, heavy silence descended over the room as my aunts and uncles stared in absolute shock, reading the undeniable financial evidence spread before them. The narrative of the victimized sister evaporated instantly, exposing Greg's shameless exploitation of my hard-earned savings, while my parents stood by and enabled his chronic irresponsibility. Today, the truth was finally exposed, shattering their carefully constructed facade of victimhood and forcing everyone present to confront the harsh reality. Turning my unyielding gaze toward my stunned parents and Aunt Linda, I delivered the final, devastating truth that completely dismantled their weaponized moral superiority. "And Mom, Dad, you promised my new house to Maya without asking me because you knew Greg wouldn't work, and you didn't want 5 people crowding your own living room." I locked eyes with Aunt Linda, asking a sharp, penetrating question that cut through her previous lectures on family sanctity like a surgeon's scalpel. "If blood obligation is so sacred, Mom and Dad, why don't you open your spacious 3-bedroom house to Maya's family today? Why don't you take them in, Aunt Linda?" The sudden, piercing silence in the room was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke, and no one offered to open their own homes to support them. "You expect me to work 60 hours a week to finance their freeloading lifestyle simply so you can feel like generous saviors without spending a single dime of your own?" I exposed their deep-seated hypocrisy for everyone to see, proving that their righteous outrage was nothing more than a selfish attempt to dump their burdens onto my shoulders. My parents stood paralyzed with shame, their faces pale and speechless, as the entire family realized who the true manipulators were. I stood tall in the quiet room, having reclaimed my dignity and shattered their toxic narrative with undeniable facts, standing completely unbowed today. The truth had finally set me free from years of guilt and obligation, establishing a permanent boundary that no one could ever cross again. Before my parents or Maya could stammer out another hypocritical defense, a sharp, deafening clatter exploded across the private dining room, shocking everyone into absolute silence. Grandma Evelyn had violently slammed her porcelain teacup down onto its matching saucer, the sudden impact rattling the silver cutlery and instantly cutting off the rising chaos. The 85-year-old matriarch stood up slowly from her seat, her usually gentle posture transforming into an aura of unyielding, formidable authority that commanded immediate respect. Her sharp, piercing blue eyes swept across the long table, burning with an intense, icy fury that locked directly onto my cowering parents and my stunned sister. There was no frail hesitancy in her movements. Her presence radiated the raw, formidable dignity of a woman who had weathered decades of life and possessed zero tolerance for cruelty. The surrounding relatives froze in place, holding their breath as they realized the family elder was about to deliver a decisive, long overdue judgment upon the conflict. Her intense gaze held my mother and father accountable, silently stripping away their self-righteous facade before they could even attempt to utter another manipulative word. The suffocating tension in the room shifted dramatically, moving away from my personal defense and anchoring entirely around the quiet, terrifying wrath of the matriarch. I sat beside her, feeling her trembling hand grip mine with surprising strength, offering a silent signal that my solitary battle against their entitlement was officially over today. The room fell into a deathly hush, completely captive to the moral clarity and unshakable strength of the woman who held our entire bloodline together. "That is quite enough," Grandma Evelyn snapped, her clear, ringing voice trembling with deep indignation that echoed off the wood-paneled walls of the restaurant. She glared directly at my father, her words cutting through his arrogant posture like a sharp blade. "Diana worked her fingers to the bone for 6 years to buy that house. How dare you try to humiliate her at my birthday party, simply to cover up your own total failure to raise responsible, self-sufficient adults?" My mother gasped, turning pale, but Grandma Evelyn immediately swung her fierce, uncompromising gaze toward Maya and Greg, who shrank back into their chairs with guilty horror. "And you two?" Grandma continued, her tone dripping with stern disapproval. "You are grown adults with 3 children, yet you act like helpless parasites, expecting others to carry your weight. You have spent years exploiting Diana's kindness, leeching off her hard work, and using your own children as emotional weapons to demand handouts you never earned. It ends tonight. You will grow up, stop making excuses, and learn what true self-respect and adult responsibility actually mean in the real world." Her fearless reprimand shattered their sense of entitlement, publicly exposing the rot of their lazy behavior before every single aunt, uncle, and cousin sitting at the table. My parents stood utterly speechless, completely dismantled by the unvarnished truth delivered by the one person whose moral authority they could never challenge or manipulate today. Her decisive intervention shattered their toxic influence forever, proving that integrity and hard work will always triumph over shameless exploitation and greed. Before anyone could process the severity of her words, Grandma Evelyn straightened her posture and delivered a decisive legal blow that permanently altered our family's financial future. To ensure that no one ever misuses family resources or enables chronic irresponsibility again," she declared calmly, her voice resonant with absolute legal finality. "I will be meeting with my estate attorney next Tuesday morning to officially amend my living trust and family inheritance documents." Maya's eyes widened in sudden, panic-stricken horror as Grandma turned her sharp gaze directly toward her trembling, silent eldest granddaughter. "Maya, your direct cash inheritance is being revoked completely," Grandma stated coldly, ignoring my sister's sharp, desperate gasp of disbelief. "Every single dollar originally allocated to you will be transferred directly into an independent 529 college savings plan established exclusively for your 3 innocent children. This fund will be managed strictly by an independent trustee, ensuring their education is secured while preventing you or Greg from touching a single penny for yourselves. With a single brilliant legal maneuver, Grandma protected her great-grandchildren's future while completely stripping my parasitic sister and brother-in-law of their unearned safety net. The announcement sealed Greg and Maya's financial fate, proving that chronic laziness and entitlement would no longer be rewarded or subsidized within our family tree today. The legal restructuring ensured that true support was directed toward the innocent children's future education, rather than funding an adult's lazy and irresponsible habits. Completely exposed, financially cut off, and publicly humiliated before 20 family members, my parents, Maya and Greg, could no longer bear the suffocating weight of the room's judgment. Without uttering a single word of defense, Greg frantically grabbed their coats, while Maya sobbed hysterically, her dramatic victim facade entirely ruined by the cold reality of her exposure. My parents gathered their personal belongings in frantic, embarrassed silence, keeping their eyes cast down toward the carpet as they suffered the ultimate social defeat. They fled the private dining room in sheer disgrace, their hasty retreat accompanied only by the soft, heavy clicks of the closing restaurant door behind them. As the door shut, a profound, transformative shift swept across the remaining relatives sitting around the long mahogany banquet table. The aunts and uncles who had previously judged me or sent lecturing text messages now turned toward me with eyes filled with profound respect, regret, and newfound understanding. They recognized the incredible strength it took for me to endure years of silent exploitation, and they respected the dignified composure I maintained while presenting undeniable facts. The toxic narrative my parents had carefully spun for months was completely dismantled, replaced by a deep, collective admiration for my resilience and unwavering personal boundaries. I was no longer viewed as the selfish outcast, but as an honorable, hard-working woman who had courageously stood her ground against manipulation and prevailed today. Standing firm in my truth had dismantled their manipulative narrative, restoring my rightful place within the family as a respected and self-determined woman. As quiet conversation gently resumed among the guests, Grandma Evelyn turned toward me, her fierce expression softening into a look of profound, tender affection. She reached out and clasped both of my hands tightly within her warm, weathered palms, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of deep, grandmotherly pride and heartfelt remorse. "I am so deeply sorry, my sweet girl," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with genuine emotion that washed over my guarded spirit like a soothing balm. "I am so sorry I didn't see their cruel selfishness sooner, and that you had to fight this painful battle all by yourself for so many years." Her sincere apology cut through years of pent-up emotional pain, dissolving the lingering shadows of my childhood neglect into a warm, healing wave of absolute relief. Sitting beside the woman who loved me unconditionally, I felt a heavy, invisible weight lift off my chest, filling my heart with a profound sense of peace. I realized I was no longer that lonely, terrified girl crying in her locked bedroom, desperately seeking approval from parents who were incapable of giving it. I was a strong, self-sufficient woman, surrounded by genuine love, anchored in my own truth, and fully empowered to build a bright, unburdened future. A deep, healing serenity settled into my soul, confirming that my courage had not only protected my home, but had ultimately set my spirit completely free today. The emotional shackles of my past had finally broken away, leaving me whole, peaceful, and entirely ready to embrace the life I had earned. In the quiet weeks that followed the fateful restaurant confrontation, I took decisive, deliberate steps to establish firm, low-contact boundaries with my immediate family. I muted my parents' numbers, blocked my sister Maya and her husband Greg across all social media platforms, and placed strict filters on my email inbox. I made a conscious promise to myself that I would no longer engage with manipulative phone calls, passive-aggressive text messages, or guilt-inducing voicemails designed to pull me back into their toxic orbit. To my profound surprise, the sudden absence of their constant demands, wild outbursts, and emotional chaos did not feel like a cold isolation, but rather like an overwhelming, healing breath of fresh spring air. The silence that enveloped my new 4-bedroom home was no longer heavy with anxiety or fear, but was instead filled with an exquisite, uninterrupted peace that I had never experienced in my entire adult life. Without the lingering threat of their unpredictable drama hanging over my head, my nervous system finally began to relax, allowing my mind and spirit to settle into a deep, restorative state of calm. I realized that setting strict boundaries with toxic blood relatives was not an act of cruelty or selfishness, but an essential form of self-preservation and self-respect that allowed my true identity to flourish. The silence from my family became the most precious, transformative gift I had ever received, granting me the sacred space to process my childhood wounds and cultivate an authentic sense of emotional freedom today. Deprived of their endless safety net and facing the brutal, unyielding reality of their financial situation, Maya and Greg were forced to confront the harsh consequences of their choices. With my bank account permanently closed to their frantic demands and Grandma Evelyn's cash inheritance officially locked away in an independent trust, their illusion of perpetual freeloading shattered completely. The imminent threat of eviction loomed large, and for the first time in their married life, no generous relative stepped forward to pay their rent or absorb their mounting debts. Faced with the absolute necessity of feeding 3 young children and keeping a roof over their heads, Greg was finally stripped of his comfortable excuses and chronic laziness. He was forced to swallow his massive, unearned pride, filling out job applications, and ultimately securing a full-time, night shift position at a local distribution warehouse. The work was physically demanding and required long, grueling hours, but it provided a steady, reliable paycheck that began to stabilize their long-neglected family finances. Maya, too, was forced to cut back on her frivolous spending habits, taking an active role in managing their household budget and meal planning rather than relying on handouts. The harsh necessity of survival compelled them to step into the world of adult accountability, proving that true growth often begins only when the comforting blanket of enabling is permanently removed today. Taking responsibility for their own lives allowed them to regain a sense of dignity that handouts could never provide. Within 2 months of Greg taking the warehouse job, Maya's family officially moved out of their old place and signed a lease on a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of town. The unit was simple, compact, and completely free of luxury amenities, but it was an affordable, dignified home that fell comfortably within their actual monthly income. Living in a smaller space required them to declutter their belongings and adjust their lifestyle, forcing them to prioritize essential living expenses over extravagant desires. Seeing them manage their own rent, pay their own utility bills, and purchase their own groceries offered an astounding, eye-opening revelation for our entire extended family. It turned out that Maya and Greg were completely capable of standing on their own 2 feet once society and family refused to subsidize their entitlement or carry their financial burdens. The smaller apartment provided them with a clean slate, a manageable environment where they could learn the value of hard work, financial discipline, and personal responsibility. Removing the option of relying on my hard-earned savings had not destroyed my sister's family, as my frantic parents had falsely claimed, but had instead rescued them from chronic helplessness. By refusing to enable their laziness, I had unintentionally pushed them towards self-sufficiency, allowing them to discover their own resilience and build a life grounded in authentic effort today. Their successful transition confirmed that true compassion lies in encouraging independence rather than fostering helpless dependency. The most heartwarming transformation unfolded in the lives of my 2 young nieces and a nephew, whose daily routines finally found a sense of stability and emotional safety. Thanks to Grandma Evelyn's brilliant legal foresight, their independent 529 college savings plan ensured their future education was fully protected from their parents' past missteps. Furthermore, with their father holding a stable job and their housing secured, the children were no longer exposed to the constant anxiety of sudden evictions or frantic late-night moves. They settled into local schools, making lasting friendships, participating in extracurricular activities, and thriving in an environment nourished by routine, and consistency. Watching them blossom in a secure, predictable home filled my heart with a profound sense of relief and quiet joy that washed away my remaining regrets. I smiled warmly, realizing that my refusal to yield at the restaurant had not only preserved my own dream home, but had ultimately protected these innocent children from a cycle of poverty and chaos. By dismantling my parents' toxic narrative and breaking the cycle of enabling, I had indirectly given my nieces and nephew a chance at a brighter, more grounded future. My firm stance had shattered a generational pattern of codependency, creating a healthy precedent where hard work, honesty, and responsibility were valued above performative victimhood. Protecting my own boundary had broken the cycle of dysfunction, offering the next generation a stable foundation upon which to build their lives. A few weeks later, a brief, unexpectedly quiet text message arrived on my phone from my father, sent with a simple, uncharacteristic tone of humility. "Diana, we are deeply sorry for how we spoke to you and for trying to force our expectations onto your home," the message read, softly. "We see now that we were wrong, and we are proud of the independent woman you have become, even if it took us far too long to understand." Reading his words, I felt a gentle, soothing warmth spread through my chest, dissolving the last lingering embers of resentment that had resided within my heart. I received their long-awaited apology with calm gratitude, but I felt no urge to rush into reopening my personal boundaries or lowering my emotional defenses. I understood that true reconciliation is a long, deliberate process, and that genuine respect requires consistent, long-term action, rather than a single remorseful message. I replied with a polite, dignified thank you, keeping my response brief and maintaining my low-contact boundary to protect the peaceful life I had so carefully cultivated. I recognized that forgiving my parents did not mean allowing them back into the driver's seat of my life. Forgiveness was a gift I gave myself to heal my own soul. I stood strong in my quiet wisdom, knowing that my self-worth was anchored securely within my own heart, completely free from the need for external validation or conditional parental praise today. I stepped forward into my future with clarity and grace, deeply anchored in the peace I had earned through courage and unwavering integrity. In the quiet, golden evenings that followed the resolution of the storm, I found a deep, meditative joy in putting the finishing touches on my home. I spent my weekends and after-work hours painting the walls of my 4-bedroom house, transforming each space with warm, soothing, and inviting color palettes. My home office became a bright, sunlit haven painted in soft sage green, fully equipped with my architectural drafting monitors and large oak desk. Across the hall, my creative design studio came alive with vibrant terracotta tones, filled with fabric swatches, physical building models, and my favorite art prints. The 3rd bedroom, converted into my long-awaited reading room, was painted in a calming, warm beige and lined with custom wooden bookshelves, brimming with literature. Finally, my master bedroom was decorated in gentle cream tones, a tranquil sanctuary featuring crisp linen sheets and sheer curtains that caught the evening breeze. painting every single wall with my own hands allowed me to pour my healing energy directly into the foundation of my personal sanctuary. Each room now possessed a distinct, functional purpose that catered to my professional passions and emotional well-being, creating a harmonious ecosystem of peace. Watching the paint dry under the warm glow of the setting sun filled me with a profound sense of pride and ownership that no family drama could ever diminish today. Every stroke of the paintbrush felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul that had been overlooked for years. As the crisp air of late autumn began to settle over the neighborhood, I gradually filled the rooms with plush, comfortable furniture and warm, golden lighting. I carefully placed thriving green houseplants near the wide windows, watching monsteras, pothos, and ferns flourish in the abundant natural sunlight that bathed the floors. Every piece of furniture was chosen with intention, creating an environment that embraced me with soft textures, cozy throw blankets, and an overwhelming sense of safety. On a quiet Sunday evening, as golden autumn leaves drifted gently past the living room windows, I lit a fire in the stone fireplace for the very first time. Sitting on the soft rug with a warm mug of tea, listening to the gentle crackle of burning oak wood, a wave of unprecedented serenity washed over my soul. The amber flames danced against the freshly painted walls, casting a soft, comforting glow that dissolved the remaining lingering shadows of my past struggles. For the first time in 34 years, I felt completely safe, warm, and anchored within my own physical and emotional space, free from fear or judgment. The quiet warmth of the hearth was a soothing balm, comforting my spirit and reassuring me that my long years of silent sacrifice had been entirely worth it. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, allowing the peaceful ambience of my living room to wrap around me like a loving, protective embrace on this crisp autumn night today. Walking through the quiet, sun-drenched hallway after a long, productive day of architectural work, I felt a deep, resonant pride swelling within my chest. This peaceful atmosphere was not a temporary luxury or a borrowed privilege, but a permanent reality, earned through my own relentless sweat, discipline, and grit. Every hardwood floorboard beneath my feet, every custom bookshelf lining the walls, and every brick forming the fireplace was a physical testament to my resilience. No amount of familial guilt, passive-aggressive manipulation, or unfair public shaming could ever strip away the undeniable truth of what I had accomplished here, on my own. I stood in the center of my home office, looking out at the spacious backyard, marveling at how far I had come from those exhausting late-night shifts. The lingering ghosts of childhood inadequacy and conditional approval had vanished completely, replaced by an unshakable sense of self-worth and internal peace. I no longer sought validation from parents who viewed my worth as a financial utility, nor did I feel obligated to subsidize the lives of people who disrespected me. My home had become a physical fortress of personal dignity, proving that a woman standing alone in her integrity can withstand any storm thrown her way. I smiled warmly at my reflection in the glass, honoring the tired girl who worked tirelessly to build a life of absolute independence and unyielding grace today. Taking full ownership of my achievements allowed me to embrace my future with unshakable confidence and joy. Sitting by the fireplace with a journal on my lap, I reflected deeply on the profound life lessons that this grueling journey had taught my spirit. I realized that standing up for yourself, setting strict boundaries, and saying no to toxic demands is never an act of selfishness or cruelty. It is a fundamental, non-negotiable requirement for self-preservation, mental health, and healthy adult maturity in a world that often demands women compromise their peace. Loving your family does not mean allowing them to destroy your financial stability, ruin your peace of mind, or turn you into a convenient anchor for their laziness. Point: true love respects boundaries, honors individual achievements, and encourages self-sufficiency rather than demanding sacrifice to appease chronic entitlement and irresponsibility. By refusing to enable my sister's family, I had not only saved myself, but I had also given them the necessary push to discover their own strength and responsibility. I learned that real strength lies in choosing self-respect over performative harmony, and in recognizing that your life belongs to you, not to your family tree. Healing begins the moment you stop seeking permission from those who broke you and start building a life rooted in your own values and authentic desires. I wrote these insights down into my journal, feeling a profound sense of emotional release and spiritual clarity wash over my mind on this quiet evening today. Understanding my true worth allowed me to release old resentments and step into a life defined by freedom. As the moon rose high over the quiet neighborhood, casting a silvery glow across my backyard, a timeless truth crystallized within my heart. Blood ties may make people related by genetics, but mutual respect, honest empathy, and unconditional love are what truly make a real family. I had spent years searching for belonging within a biological structure that treated me as a utility, only to find true family in those who respected my boundaries. My grandmother's fierce love, my cousin Sarah's quiet honesty, and my own unyielding self-respect had shown me what authentic connection truly looks like in action. I felt immense gratitude for every hard-earned dollar, every late-night shift, and every difficult boundary I had enforced to reach this moment of complete serenity. I was 34 years old, standing in a beautiful 4-bedroom home that belonged entirely to me, free from debt, guilt, or toxic control. Looking out at the starlit sky, I smiled softly to myself, feeling a warm, radiant energy blossoming within my soul as I prepared for sleep. I welcomed the brilliant, unburdened new chapter of my life with open arms, confident in my strength and excited for the infinite possibilities ahead. My story was no longer defined by the expectations of others, but by the quiet, radiant beauty of my own self-determination and lasting inner freedom today. The journey had been long and painful, but the peace resting in my heart was worth every single struggle.